A faculty member wrote and asked, let's say I'm assessing Chapter 1 only, and this chapter only covers SLOs 1 and 2. How do I go about assessing only certain SLOs? I'm working here in my sandbox, and my sandbox currently has no outcomes in it. If you've copied your course from a prior term, you may already have outcomes that were copied across from the prior term. I'm going to, though, go ahead and start from scratch since there are no outcomes in this particular sandbox. I'm going to go to Find because I'm going to work with the course learning outcomes that are already stored in the College of Micronesia Bank of Outcomes. I'll go ahead and drill down to, let's go down to SC 101 Health Science. SC 101. And I'm going to add these in. And this may take a little time. You may see it spin for a while to get these added in. But go ahead and let it work. I'm pulling these in. Let this one come in. I'll go ahead and pre-select. If you want to see more about an outcome, you can click on the chevron here and see the more of the specific details in the outcome. So those are still loading in. It's got in, there's outcome 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and 6 are still loading in. So I'll let those get loaded in. That is, it can take time. It's pulling them from a back-end database that has all of the learning outcomes. There's 5. I'll let 6 come in too. It has all of these student learning outcomes. So they're now added in, and I can say done, and those will show up here in their own little group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These have been pulled down now. They're now attached to my sandbox course, but they've been pulled down from the institutional level, which will allow reporting to go back out to the institution as well as to the mastery screen of grades. To use these outcomes, say to use just 1 and 2 for, say, Chapter 1, I'm going to need to make some rubrics that I'll use to mark that particular assignment. So I'll go here and I'll call this, say, the Chapter 1 rubric. And I like to put a date code on it because when I alter a rubric, edit the rubric, say from term to term, I'll get a slightly different rubric, and if I want to go back and pull an old rubric, if they're all of the same name, I'll have a hard time knowing whether that was the fall rubric or the spring rubric or the 2021 or 2022. So what I've got there is a year. Spring is 1, summer 2, and fall is 3. A little code to myself that this will be that particular outcome. You can have a criteria. I'm going to go ahead and remove that. Find outcome. I don't need to add one because I already have them. Chapter 1, we want to mark with 1 and 2. And I'll add those two. So this rubric will now mark student learning outcomes 1 and 2 only. The other ones are still there, and I'll create that rubric. To show you, say, Chapter 2 evaluates learning outcome 3, I'll just add another rubric and call that Chapter 2. And you can call rubrics anything you want to call them. And I'll give it a date code as well, and I'll tell it, you can have criteria. I'm just eliminating them to make my life easier, and tell it, all right, I just want outcome number 3 in this rubric. We'll get there in a moment. Let me go ahead and create that rubric and then go in and edit it. But sometimes this morning I've noticed I've got some slowness either on the internet or back in database. So I'll go ahead and refresh the page and go ahead and re-add that Chapter 2 rubric. And my guess is it looks a little bit like a back end. And I'll go ahead and put that back in. So you just refresh the page if you run into a problem. Should iron out, import that. There's my number 3. I'll get rid of that, didn't need that. I'll go ahead and create this rubric. So when in doubt, refresh the page and you can rebuild these things. There's my Chapter 1 rubric up here. It's separate from my Chapter 2 rubric here. So I have 2 rubrics, and I've got 2 criterion in the first rubric and 1 in the second. Now to use that rubric, I'll have to attach it to an assignment. So sort of, I think of it as a third step. Go make an assignment. It's a temporary assignment. It's going to have a description, and I can go through and set the points and whatever else I want to set for this particular one, how I want things to be submitted, due date, whenever that might be, and I'll go ahead and I save this at this point because the rubric gets attached here, and I'm going to go ahead and go to find a rubric and say this is for the first class. So I'm going to go down. There's my sandbox. It's got the 2 rubrics. You can see why I've been date naming my rubrics. So I have access to all my prior rubrics, and so date scores will help me locate a particular, and some of them don't have it, but a more recent practice I have is to do this. So you can see here that was for summer. This is for fall. So as the terms go by, these lists may get bigger and less, more unwieldy. So it does seem to help to have some sort of date code in them. Anyway, I'll go ahead and attach this rubric here, rubric number 1. Can be a little hard to see. Scroll down, use this rubric. And that's the rubric now. And this, if I want this rubric to grade this assignment, then I've got to go here to the pencil, use this rubric for assignment grading. That was a pencil up there. And then update the rubric. And I'm going to go ahead and change it if that's what I wanted to do. The rubric does not have to grade the assignment. The assignment can have a different number of points that I manually type in. So that's a powerful feature. It allows you to use a rubric, but use your own scoring system separate from the rubric. And now, of course, that's my assignment set up with a rubric. If I wanted an assignment for Chapter 2, let's go back to assignments. That's a syllabus. Go back to assignments, add another assignment, call this the Chapter 2 temporary. I use words like that to remind myself that these things aren't permanent. And I can go ahead and save that. Go to the rubric, find a rubric, go down to my sandbox, grab the Chapter 2 rubric that I've got there. You can see I've got the same one. I actually created multiple rubrics there, no problem. And there's my rubric. And again, if I wanted to grade it, I can go down here and use this assignment for grading, update, change. One final note, let me go back to assignments. Suppose I reuse a rubric. Let's call this temporary 3. Suppose I go back and reuse, let me just save this, come out here, find a rubric. Let me reuse that first rubric in my sandbox, rubric number 1. There we go. That's better. They didn't get duplicate appearances. If I click on this, I get a warning at this point. I just clicked on the pencil. I'm trying to change it to grade it. You can't edit this rubric, either because ignore that message. Continue anyway. I'm not editing the rubric. When I say OK, what I want to have happen appears here. That's one of the most misleading dialog boxes I know. What they're talking about is if I alter the rubric up here, it'll carve off a new copy of the rubric. It splits off a new copy because you may have already done grading on the old copy. At this point, this is also misleading. When I update the rubric, it does not change the rubric. It only lets it grade it. I'll go ahead and say yeah, let it grade it. And so just a heads up that you'll see that warning message as you assign rubrics to subsequent assignments, especially if you do as I do and let the rubric grade the assignment. I hope that addresses the question, and if not, do let me know.